Okay, I've completed gathering all the additional data I needed before beginning to optimize this strategy. Also, seeing as we only had 91 trades, I've gone through and backtested all of 2017 as well. That gained us an extra 49 trades, so we're now at 140, which is a much more comfortable number to begin a little bit of optimization. Ideally, I would like to have above 200, possibly 250, but for now, 140 is going to do just fine. You'll also notice our maximum win adjust level is highlighted in red. What that means is this value is set below the value of one of our stop losses. So if we look down here, we'll find our first one being this 103.8. So if we've capped it at 100, but our stop loss is 103.8, it will incorrectly mark this as a losing trade. So I'm going to bump this up until we are clear of that red. 130, 140, there we are. The red disappears, so we can see 140 is where we're clear of this. We've got a 129.3 there, and if we combine that with a spread, that'd bring us over 130. Another thing to notice is I have spread set to 2 pips. So spread is the difference between buying and selling rates in foreign exchange. For example, when you go to exchange cash while you're traveling abroad, you'll see a buy and sell rate. This is the difference between them, and sometimes it can be the difference between winning and losing a trade. And basically just means that if we have something very close, like this one I've just spotted here, where it's 0.1 pip between the swing and the stop loss, it'll actually mark that as a loss because of the way the foreign exchange market works. We have a spread which is going to offset that a little bit. So if I'm to change that to 0, that trade should become winning. There we are, because there's a 0.1 difference. But with a 2 pip spread, it's actually going to mark that as a loss, which should give us a more accurate representation of what's going to happen when we take this out and trade it. Spread is something we can cover more when we're looking towards live trading, and it's never a fixed value, it's always floating. Sometimes it peaks right up and sometimes it's barely anything. It often sits around 0.5 on a few currencies I trade, but I like to set it at 2 just so I've got a good buffer. I want to add some color to these entry candle areas just to make them a little easier to see. So I'm going to go to Format, Conditional Formatting. I'm going to say the columns L and M I want this to apply to. And if this cell is text is exactly yes, then I actually want this to show red. And if I click add another rule, it'll set it all up exactly the same. If it shows no, then I want it to show green. I set it this way because no is actually our desirable result, and I want it to match up with the colors of win. That way it's very easy to see when yeses are and look to filter a few of them out. So all of these yeses and nos are whether the entry candle is larger than the first candle body or the first candle wick. Conversely, I noticed while backtesting that there were a few times when we were dealing with very small candles, almost doji candlesticks. So I want to make sure I'm not going to be dealing with things like that. And although I haven't logged it, I feel like there's a pretty clear way of doing that. The RSI makes big moves upon big candles, and in very small candles, it might make very small moves. For example, here, 48.86 to 50.04. That's quite a small move. This one here as well, 52 to 53. So I'm going to look for things that have slightly bigger moves and see whether that hits our fine medium. It's not too big an entry candle, and it's also not a tiny entry candle. So to do this, I'm actually going to use a calculation. So I want to add another column that's going to automatically calculate it. So I'll put it next to our win and loss result, and I'll say RSI difference. I'm going to write this formula in the first cell just to check it works, and then I'll turn it into an array formula and put it in row 6, what I use for all my formulas. So first thing I want to do is put in if is blank. We're going to use column R, so I'll say R7 for the moment. If that's blank, do nothing, which is why I've got a comma with nothing in it, and then the expression of it's false after the second comma. So if this is false, meaning it has a value in there, I want to check if it's a long or a short trade first. So now in order to calculate this, I need to first check if we are going long or short. So let's say if T7 equals long, then we'll get R7 to minus the previous RSI, Q7, And if it's not going long, then we'll do Q7 minus R7. Let's close that off. Cool. It's asking us if we want to autofill, but I actually want to use an array formula. That way, if I ever need to update anything, I'm only dealing with one formula, not having to copy and paste it all the way down. Okay, so that looks like it works. So I'm going to copy this formula and I'm going to move up my cell. I'm going to paste it in the formula bar and I'm going to change this R7. So we're in R6 now. So I'm going to change this R7. We're in row 6 now. So I want to change the 7s to 6 and I want to go to the end of the sheet. So we're going T, R6 to R, Q6 to Q, and same again, Q6 to Q, and R6 to R. And then for me, Command Shift Return, it might be Control Shift Return for those of you on PC. And then we hit Enter, we delete our first formula, and there we are. Okay, so it's usually at about this point I want to make a backup, so I'll just duplicate this and call this data input backup. Okay, so going back to our main sheet, now I want to see if removing certain trades will actually bump up this win percentage quite a bit. And this is where we get to play around with all the factors and see what's going to make a difference. So if I select something in column U, my entry reason, first thing I'm going to do is see if there's a vast difference between an entry that is using the body crossing the 35 or the wick. So I can go to Data, Sort Sheet by column U. If you get this error, just say don't show this again for 5 minutes, and there we go. Okay, so now we can see that we are sorted by all the entries that are 35 body and then all the entries that are 35 wick. So the easiest way is to go through and select all of the rows that have 35 wick, go right across, delete all of this, and we can see 61.19, we get 1.19% difference. I'd say that's not a striking difference at the moment. So entry reason seems to be fine. Direction, it's going to work both long and short, I would imagine. And we are looking at our candle sizes as well. So we have our entry candle being larger than the first body or being larger than the first candle wick. And we also have our RSI difference. Now I imagine the RSI difference has some correlation to here, but not necessarily always. Generally, the larger figures are shown here on the difference though. So also going into our candle sizes. So I've logged down when the entry candle was larger than the first candle body and the first candle wick. And also I've got a calculation for the RSI difference. So generally I would expect the RSI difference to be on the larger side with ones where the entry candle is making a massive move and larger than the first candle. There will be a few outliers, but generally it seems to be that these yeses are higher ones. So I'm going to actually order this column here, the RSI difference, and we'll see if we visually, this is where it's very handy to have these colors. I can see that there are very few instances of the entry candle being larger than the first candle here, and they start to creep in, and very much so towards the end. So those could be a pattern that I look at, why there's so many more at the end, and there's a fairly consistent distribution of losses and wins. And they seem to taper off. There seems to be quite a few wins in this mid region here and a few more losses, about evening out again. So seeing as there's this nice little bump in the middle here where we seem to have more wins than losses, I might try to limit my capture to this area. So I might set a cutoff for my RSI. Let's see what happens if I notate that there must be an RSI value difference. So we have half. Let's say what happens if we get to 1. We get like 1.9%. So we get about a 2% difference, which could add up over time. Let's look at 1.5. Where are we? Anything below 1.5? It's a 2% difference. Okay, so that's actually improving it. I'm going to get down to about 2-ish here. I don't want to be narrowing my results too much. You can see there, we're almost at 5% difference, just from actually writing out these smaller values here. So quite like that. Let's look down at 2.5, 65%. So looking to reduce somewhere between 2 to 2.5. I'm starting to worry about getting up to this long streak of wins when we're above 2.5, sorry, when we're getting close to 3, you can see we're dropping back down a little bit. So that's me being a bit too broad on it. I'm looking, we get a few wins before that. It kind of evens out from about 2 onwards. So I'm going to say that I'm going to remove everything below 2. So let's get rid of anything below 2. So we must have a larger difference than 2. So diff larger than 2. I'll just mark that down as a potential rule above the RSI, just so I know what it correlates to. And now I want to look at the other side, these candles here. We saw a lot of them down the end here. Okay, so we removed a lot of the smaller moves in terms of RSI values. And I'm going to have a look at what happens if we remove the larger side. Let's say anything above 10. So that brings us 0.75% or so. We're creeping up, but it's just kind of, I don't want to cut into any of these big win areas, and there seems to be quite a even distribution near the end here. So I don't want to completely remove them, but we see our frequency of the entry candle being larger than the first body and first wick. That's kind of dropping off as we move up and get into these more win sections. So I might actually sort by these columns. Let's go sort by the wick first. There'll be fewer of them, and I'll sort Z to A so I get the yes before the no. And then if I select something in the M column, I'll do the same. Okay, so that'll be all of our yeses up top there. So I want to see what happens if I just remove every instance of the entry candle closing above the first candle's wick. Okay, so that brings us just under 1.5%, 1.49 to be precise. That's not that big a move for the amount of candles we're removing. So if I look at everything that is all of the yeses, so every time the entry candle closes beyond the first candle's body, if I remove all of them, that is now where we see a substantial move. So it seems like there is a correlation between the entry candle size and a winning or losing trade. Okay, so that could be just because of the size of the candles. We need a much larger move to actually hit targets on this type of move. If we look at our stop losses, we can see there's a lot in the 30s and 40s, some in the hundreds, and some in the upper kind of 70s and 80s. If we look around here, we're actually dealing with smaller trades. Our stop losses are generally in the 30s, 40s, and some in the 50s, with the occasional outlier as well. So it seems I've found the happy median, removing all the small trades with an RSI difference of less than 2, combined with removing all the trades where the entry candle closed beyond the body of the first candle, means that we're not dealing with trades of indecision where small values are sitting around the 35, unsure which way they're going to go. And we're not dealing with trades where the entry candle has already exhausted a lot of its move just in the trade setup. Okay, so now I will sort the sheet by time and then date again to get this all back into order. Okay, so for comparison's sake, if we look at our backup before we optimized, we were sitting at 60% win rate. And now if we look at our optimized one, we are looking at a 70.15% win rate. That's quite a substantial difference. I want to see what happens if we go through all of our stop loss options again. That may have actually changed how our stop losses react.